Just can you tell me about the 2 by 10 relationship building model and how you've used it at Hartranft?
So my understanding of the 2 by 10 relationship model is that teachers are supposed to strategically identify a student who they are going to meet with for 10 consecutive days to have informal 2-minute conversations that is about anything other than academics and also about anything other than students' conduct, where they are sharing information with their students about themselves, and then their students are also sharing information with the teacher. Those conversations are to build the relationships, and the idea is that the teacher would do this with all of their students throughout the course of the year to further build those relationships. And that doesn't happen organically when teachers are delivering content. So it creates a space for them to be intentional about building the relationships. And you said, what is my experience with it?
Yeah, so how you've been using it at Hartranft and anything you can say about the impact that you've seen it have.
Absolutely. So the way that we used it at Hartranft, we identified a criteria first. I met with Jill. Jill explained it to me. I can say wholeheartedly that what we were doing with our students prior to that, it just definitely wasn't working. We had data to prove that it wasn't working. And so when Jill pitched the idea to me, I said, what we're doing isn't working, so let's try it. But I also know that I have teachers who are very similar to me when I was in the classroom, where I said, well, let me see data that works with the students that we currently serve. And so I recommended that we start out with the cohort first before doing it school wide, to do 3 different cycles to make sure that it is something that we can come back and say to the rest of our teachers, hey, we tried this and it worked. So we organized we identified, I should say, 4 early adopters. And those 4 people, one was our climate staff person, climate staff specialist to be exact. 2 were 6th grade teachers, and 1 was our SBTL. We had them look at the data that Jill provided for us, as far as what 2 by 10 stood for, what it represented, the purpose, all of those things. And she just provided some other additional resources for us to know that this is something that has proven successful. And after going through it, they said, yes, we're on board, sign me up. They signed up. They identified, like, they were excited to identify their child that they were going to work with. They really forged those relationships with those students. And then we started to see some changes. And so in debriefing with them, I said, hey, can we go for a second cycle? They said, yes, we're still on board. I have my child in mind already. Something that interesting that really happened that stood out for me was Jill and I shared with them, you're supposed to move on to the next child. And they actually kept their original student and they added on another student. But it also got to a point that by the time we got to the 3rd cycle, students were coming to them if they were absent or something, to say, hey, I want my 2 minutes with you. Am I getting my 2 minutes? So it became something that the students were looking forward to just as much as the teacher. And we also had opportunities, or situations, I should say, where the teacher, for different reasons, may have been absent. And one of the things that they came back and said was, I have to make up those days I really missed, that time with my child. And then I buddied up with some of the students who were still having a little bit of a difficult way to go. I buddied up with some of them, and we were able to identify things that they were doing, and we just really got good feedback. And so then from that, we said, well, let's open it up to another cohort. Per Jill's idea, she said, hey, let's keep it moving forward. Let's spread the love. Let's identify some other early adopters. And so we used the data. They filled out a survey that I created. We used that data, and the teachers were really excited about joining. Like every single teacher that I had identified, they just were like, yes. I asked a 4th grade teacher. I asked a few other teachers, and a 7th grade teacher, an 8th grade teacher, and one more teacher, and a 3rd grade teacher. The idea is to target some other grades so that those teachers can help us when we start in the fall. We'll do the framing of the 2 by 10, but to have them lead with that work, to be able to say, like, we actually tried this with our students, it really worked. And so I'm excited that we now have 2 sets of early adopters, which is a total of 8 teachers doing it. And they understand that we're looking for them to help us spread the good news and the love for the upcoming school year. And we're looking to partner it with our Relationships First coaches.
That's so cool. I loved hearing about that. Last question is just any advice you might give to another school leader who wanted to implement a strategy like this at your school? Just any learnings or tips that you learned from going through this process?
So, a couple of tips that come to mind first that I think about is initially when Jill shared this with me, I thought of the reluctance that some of my teachers had when we brought in our Relationships First coaches. And their reluctance was, I don't need someone to tell me how to build a relationship with my students. And so my response to them was, this is a strategic way that all of us can know that we're approaching this work the same way so that we can say, yes, this worked, or no, it didn't work. And so I think being able to have some answers on deck, if you will, to say, like, if a teacher is reluctant, to be able to say to them why it's important, and the fact that it is a strategic and a very intentional approach. And I think sometimes teachers think about, this is one more thing I have to do, but 2 minutes is such a short time that can make such a big difference if it's used strategically and intentionally. So when I'm transitioning my kids to small group instruction, that's a quick moment for me to grab that student. When I'm transitioning my students to lunch, that's a quick moment to say, hey, can I have a minute with you, and just have that conversation. And then when it gets to a point that the students are initiating that conversation, is super, super valuable, because it means that they're invested in that process as well. So I think if you lead with keep the students at the forefront of it, that the students they're worth us taking the risk. They're worth us investing to have an intentional relationship with them, so that it's not just about I'm standing and giving content, but I'm actually interested in who is this showing up in my space? Who is this that I'm teaching, and who is this? Because we're a community of learners. We're teaching and learning together. So who am I beyond this content area that I teach? And the students need to know, and that's one of the things that the teacher said. I think about a particular teacher who played basketball with her students, and all of a sudden the world opened up, and they said, we didn't know that there was this side to this person, right? And so just for them to see that the teacher who is teaching them every day is human, also wants to be accepted by their students, is super, super important to build in an intentional way. And I know I say the word intentional a lot, but that's important, that it is really intentional work being done. And I would encourage them to also track it, to see, like, what's the students' feedback about this? How did the student feel about these questions? And then the other thing that I would suggest is, for your teachers who are not very outgoing, perhaps giving them a set of questions to lead those conversations, is I think that would be really helpful. I can think of one of my teachers who, when I look back on it, that would have been helpful, having some discussion starters, if you will.